Hey, what's up, guys? 2021, what now? Well, I created this series to be fully self-expressed about issues that come up. This is not so much, hey, like me or agree with me. You can dislike it, disagree, never watch it again, whatever. It's totally cool. And at the same time, I'm hoping that some people will hear this because certain things I've heard from other people's videos or expressions or mentors certainly made a difference for me. So there is perhaps a slightly personal motive in there for wanting to make a difference. I'm not going to hide that. But also it really is this way for me to express what's circulating in the ether, right? In the human ether right now. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about is this current conversation that I've seen sounded in stereo from different sources, different people, and it's around freedom of speech. What is freedom of speech? Well, if we're going to take it by its name, by its word, then it's the freedom, the given, I don't want to say right, that's another topic. It's not necessarily a right until it became a law, right? And then it's a right. So let's just call it the right to say what you believe at any given time in life. That's sort of my definition, freedom of speech. What has happened recently, especially, is that I've noticed that people are hijacking. It's almost like they're hijacking this law, right? The given freedom of speech in our Constitution. And they're saying, yeah, that's great, but we don't agree that certain people should have freedom of speech because their speech is, whatever they call it, hateful, angry, inciting, racist, and so forth, right? So I thought about it, and at first, let's face it, if we all have this virtue-driven being inside of us that says, I do want to be the good citizen, the nice person, I do want us all to get along, and I do want there to be more love and peace, right? If we're in that camp, and I know most of the people I know are in that camp, if we're in that camp, then it makes sense to say, if anybody says anything harmful or angry or racist and so forth, it makes sense, no pun intended, to censor them, right? And I'm not talking about Facebook or Twitter, their recent actions of taking down certain accounts, including our president's. That's not what I'm referring to. I'm talking more about people who think that freedom of speech is a right until someone says something that they don't agree with, right? And when I say they don't agree with, we don't agree with, I don't agree with, like love, peace, unity, connection, equality, right? The problem is with that, how do we enforce that? I mean, seriously. How do we enforce it and who enforces it? And before I even go to that, because that would be like a solution, right? I still want to finish my thought around why I believe it's dangerous. And I personally believe it's completely not helping us to hijack freedom of speech and to make it conditional. And what do I mean by conditional? For example, let's take love, right? As a parent, I have 2 children. As a parent, I can withhold my love if I want to. I can tell my son, I want you to be happy and play and be yourself, and I'm celebrating who you are, until there's something that you do that I don't agree with, and I have every right to do that. I'm a parent, right? If they run into the street when there's cars, of course I want to guide them, hold them back from committing something like that, right? But just as a general concept, follow me here. Love can be conditional. And the moment it becomes conditional, it's no longer love. Now it's a transaction. It's almost like business. Like if you do this, I love you. But if you do that, I don't love you. And it would be easy right now to jump in and say, well, that makes sense. If you're a nice boy, if you're a good boy, if you're loving, I love you. If you're going to be a little jerk at the playground, no, I don't love you right now. Now, you may not say this to your child. You may just put on a stern face and say like, that's wrong, and we're going to have timeout, and we don't do that, right? That in itself, that way of being, is the absence of love. Now, we have to get into what is love. My definition, and I'm borrowing this from Landmark Education, which is based on EST, and there's many other motivational speakers and Tony Robbins and people who use a similar definition, which is it's a function of accepting someone for who they are and who they are not. Now, when a child is being loving, it's easy to love them. When they're being naughty or angry or even mean, right? It's also very easy to not love them at that moment. It's almost like a reflex. So in that moment, though, when we withhold our love from our children, right in that moment, that child makes up their mind. It's like a decision, and it's going to last them into their adulthood unless they undo it, right? And it's possible. But they're going to think, okay, either I should never be fully self-expressed, even if I'm hurting or even if I'm angry. It's wrong to have those emotions. I behaved wrong. I'm a bad boy. Whatever the thing, the sentencing that's happening inside of their mind at the time is, they will take that into their adulthood. And to me, that is conditional love. That is not unconditional love. Love is, by its nature, unconditional. If it's conditional, it's a transaction and it's no longer love. Now, you can argue that, you can Hallmark card it, as I call it, where you can say love is just feeling good around certain people and certain people I don't love, right? Again, that's transactional. That's not actually love, because we can love every single person that has ever lived. That's correct. Include anyone. I know you're going to go, oh, well, would you love Hitler? Yes, you can. You can do that because you're not agreeing with what that person did. You don't have to. You can, if there's freedom of speech, unless there's not. You can, but you can disagree and say, I still love you, which means I still accept you for who you are and who you're not. And right now, there's going to be some of you, and trust me, I was there too, but in the past, that say, that's bullshit. That's how we perpetuate hate, by quote unquote accepting someone like Hitler, for example, right? Well, that's not what I'm saying. Because if we truly love someone for where they're at in life, who they are right now, who they're not in that moment, and give them that space, they will find less reason, and they are going to be less triggered to do perpetually the bad things that they're doing. I know this is a huge mouthful, and this almost warrants another episode that I want to do on love for sure. I just want to go back now to freedom of speech. What has that to do with anything? Well, my claim is that when we actually limit freedom of speech for certain people, even if they're speaking hate or racism, what we're actually doing is we're telling these people in this moment, you're wrong. And while they might be wrong in a universe that is set up, or you should say a virtue signaling community that we are, that is set up to say we're going to love, we're going to be inclusive, we're not going to hate, we're going to not be racists, right? Even if that's the setup, when we then tell someone like that they're wrong, that they actually don't matter, that they're assholes, that we should lock them up, that they're all, uneducated, blah, 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 whatever we want to call it at that moment. And I'm using that example because that's what's currently floating around in our universe. When we do that, we're actually causing the opposite. I know we mean well. I know we mean well by saying freedom of speech should be limited to certain people. We've heard it before. It seems to make sense. The media talks about it. The politicians talk about it, and so forth. Here's the problem. This is the kicker. The problem is that we're not actually addressing the cause of why certain people are that way. We're not actually going into the fabric of culture, into the fabric of family and education and our value system to look and say, how could people like the ones we're despising, if we're despising them for saying the things they say and violating what we call freedom of speech, how can such people exist? Why would they even think like that, act like that, be like that, right? If we dig in there and don't stop and say, well, they're just idiots, they're just assholes, they're just bad apples. Think about it. We're all born at some point at ground zero, and then we're like 3 years old, 4 years old, little kids. We come out of diapers. We love candy. We love playing with our friends. We love, going to school. We love learning. And then fast forward, someone's 50 years old and they say something hateful in their speech. And we go, oh, he's just an asshole. Well, that's being ignorant. If we do that, if we just literally outcast someone who we think should not have freedom of speech, that right, we're literally doing what we're doing with our prison system. We're just throwing people into prison, hoping that they will go away, saying they're bad apples, it's their problem, they're wrong, evil, whatever. And we never look at the true causes. And the true causes, and this is again another episode, really, really, really are starting to speak loudly to me when I look around, especially with the research we're doing on our ADHD documentary. The causes are somewhere nestled in limited consciousness and parenting, fatherless households or single parent household, divorces, lots of trauma, lots of educational systems that are falling apart, that are antiquated and inadequate. And those are the things we should be focused on, not who should have freedom of speech and who should not. Because what we're then doing, and this is going back to an earlier point, who is going to enforce that, how, and why? Suddenly, someone like Facebook or Twitter will take the lead and say, well, I mean, you kind of want us to censor these people, right? Because we're the loudest platform, so we're just going to say this is against freedom of speech or this is not right. And then they get censored. Honestly, right now, I could care less if President Trump's account got taken down or not. What I'm more concerned about, again, is that the conversation of limiting freedom of speech for certain individual is a very dangerous conversation, because it's actually, just like medicating a child for ADHD, it's simply putting a Band-Aid, trying to cover up some symptoms, when in fact, there's a deeper wound underneath that Band-Aid. And as you and I know, a simple Band-Aid cannot stop a very deep wound from bleeding. And if we don't start looking at where this wound is, how it happened, how as a society we all could be responsible, you and I can be responsible for all these people that are in our lives that we call crazy, angry, evil, whatever. If we can be responsible as a community and say, this is happening on our watch, in our community, in our country, if we can own our country, be responsible for this country, and for actually creating 2.0 America, right? The next version of America, then we really have to look at what the causes are, not the symptoms. People out there are getting riled up about the symptoms of these people and these angry people and evil and lock them up and all that stuff. Ain't gonna make a difference. How do I know? Look around. Look at the statistics of the prison system. Look at the statistics of divorce. Look at the statistics of suicide, homicide, anything with side, pesticide, side, the wrong side, good side, anything, right? Look at the world right now. And I doubt you can powerfully look me in the eye and say, no, the world's doing pretty good. I think if that's how you feel, your head's in the sand. Because my head was in the sand when I finally took it out and realized, man, we live in a disordered culture. That is now scientifically proven, because over 70% of Americans are on one prescription drug or more. 70%. If that's not scientific or medical proof for you that we are living in a disordered culture, society, right? In this case, America. If that's not enough, what do we need? What proof do we need that it's not working. How come it's not working? We've been putting band-aids on symptoms and we've not been addressing the causes. And I'm here to say, by limiting freedom of speech for certain people, it's kind of like withholding love for your children when they're acting out, when they're being what we call naughty or sometimes, mean or evil at the playground. It's the same thing. You may say, well, no, it's not the same thing. One can incite hate and anger and protests and cause people death. Sure, well, they're by nature different, but it's the same concept. And if we do that, we're going to raise another generation of people who are going to be upset, pissed off, angry, and so forth. If you don't mind, if that's okay, go ahead and limit certain people's freedom of speech. Sure, give certain companies the right to do that, right? And see what happens 10 years from now. Let's look back. And then if you're like, F this, I'm out of this country's going to shit, well, you were part of it. Because by doing that, we're actually perpetuating forward into the future more hate, more withholding of love, more judgment, more righteousness, more elitism of like, oh, those uneducated, stupid people. That to me, right there, is actually a privilege, abuse of privilege. I don't care if you're white, Hispanic, Black, Native American, Asian, I don't care. When that privilege comes down, that highbrow educational privilege of those stupid people and us educated people, or I'm right, you're wrong, or you shouldn't have freedom of speech, I should, or blue is better than red, you catch the drift, you're catching the drift here. When we keep that in place, and that's what I'm hearing out there right now, nothing's going to change. Nothing. You'll still be right that what is shouldn't be. And you'll still be angry that your life isn't fulfilled or that you're not thriving because someone else is doing something, some president or some government or some virus or some neighbor, right? If that's where we end up, nothing's going to change, my friends. So I invite you, just like I invite myself every day, to look in my life. Where can I look at the causes, for example, for my children to be upset, for me to be upset at my wife, for me to not talk to my neighbor, for me to want to cut off communication with someone else who has a different opinion. I had that the other day where I was reading someone's post. It was a very hateful post in general, and I was going to unfriend this person, and I thought, no, because that person has the right to be fully self-expressed just as much as I do. Doesn't mean I agree, but I can take a stand for your freedom of expression. I don't have to agree with what you preach, right? So I'm just going to leave it here. This episode was about not limiting, not policing freedom of speech, because then it's no longer freedom of speech. And if we're thinking that changing this now, that having amendment, is that what it's called, addendum? Freedom of speech 2.0, sorry, we're just going to adjust this now, here's why, then we really have to look at who makes that decision and how we police that. And not just police that, but also how do we spend the equal amount of time and energy on actually looking at the source, the causes, right? The source of it, and actually work with that as well. Not just using our time and energy and money to police and throw people in jail and make them wrong and take them off of platforms. That's going to cause more hate. That's going to not address the actual problem. That's all I wanted to share. 2021 is going to be an awesome year. What now? See you next time. Please like and subscribe if you like and you want to subscribe. If you don't, you don't. Have an amazing weekend, y'all. See you next time.